Ethan Raines was a man who had built his life around control. Every move he made was measured, every risk carefully calculated, every word spoken with precision to the world. He was the untouchable millionaire CEO, the kind of man whose very presence commanded attention. His photographs were printed in glossy magazines. His interviews aired on prime television. His reputation polished to shine like gold. Success wrapped around him like an armor, and he wore it so tightly that few ever glimpsed the man inside. But armor is heavy, and no matter how strong, it can crack. It was late evening when Catherine walked into his office, her fingers clenched around a folded paper. The city glittered below the tall windows, but her eyes were fixed on him. Ethan didn't look up immediately. He was buried in contracts, his phone buzzing with endless notifications, the world waiting for his decisions. To him, every problem had a solution. Every complication could be handled with money, strategy, or sheer willpower. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled but carried a strength that surprised even her. "Ethan, we're going to have a baby." The pen in his hand paused mid-stroke. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, slowly lifted to meet hers. He had faced boardrooms of cutthroat investors, courtroom battles, and billion-dollar crises without flinching. Yet in that moment, he felt something shift inside him, something he refused to name. "How far along?" His tone was flat, almost mechanical. "Just a few weeks," Catherine said, her lips trembling into a hopeful smile. "I know this isn't what we planned, but Ethan, this could be something good, something real." For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy between them. Catherine searched his face for warmth, for even the smallest sign that the man she loved could share her joy. But what she found was steel. "This isn't the right time," he said at last, his words clipped and cold. "You know how much is at stake right now. The company, the investors, the deals on the table. This will only get in the way." Her chest tightened. "Get in the way, Ethan. This isn't a distraction, it's our child, a piece of us. How can you?" But he cut her off, his voice as sharp as glass. "I can't let this happen. Catherine, not now. You'll handle it." The world seemed to tilt under her feet. She stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Handle it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "That's your answer." He didn't flinch. He didn't soften. His eyes were fixed on hers, but they held no warmth, only the cold certainty of a man who believed his way was the only way. In that moment, Catherine realized that the man who had once made her feel seen, cherished, and alive was gone, replaced by someone who saw life as nothing more than another problem to be managed. Tears burned at the back of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I thought love would mean something to you, that we would mean something." Her words trembled, but each one carried the weight of her breaking heart. Ethan's jaw tightened. His silence was louder than any reply. The air between them fractured. Catherine's chest ached as she realized that nothing she could say would reach him. He was too guarded, too trapped inside the fortress of power he had built around himself. And so, with a quiet strength that surprised her, she turned away. That night, she packed a single suitcase. She left his penthouse, the world of glass and steel and endless city lights, without looking back. She walked into the unknown, carrying with her nothing but hope, determination, and a grainy ultrasound photo folded carefully in her purse. As the rain fell softly against her cheeks, she whispered to the tiny heartbeat growing inside her, "I'll protect you. I'll protect both of you, no matter what it costs me." Back in his office, Ethan poured himself a drink and stood at the window. He told himself he had done the right thing, the logical thing, the strong thing. Catherine was emotional, irrational, blinded by sentiment. He was saving them both from a burden they weren't ready for. That was how he justified it. That was the story he repeated in his mind until the ache in his chest dulled into silence. But deep inside, beneath the pride and the control, something stirred. A small, uneasy voice he refused to listen to. He drowned it with work, with late nights and contracts, with numbers and victories. Yet even as his empire grew taller and stronger, the silence in his penthouse grew louder. Catherine, meanwhile, faced a very different world. The days were long and uncertain. She had no savings worth speaking of, no family she could lean on. and nowhere to go but forward. But her resolve was unshakable. For every door that closed in her face, she found another way. For every night she lay awake in fear, she found strength in the thought of the lives inside her. The struggle was real, and at times it broke her down, but never completely. Each morning, she rose again, driven by the promise she had whispered in the rain. And though Ethan didn't know it yet, the choice he made that night had set both their lives on paths they could never have predicted. His empire would bring him power, but not peace. Her journey would bring her hardship, but also something far greater: resilience, hope, and a love so fierce it would carry her through every storm. Years later, when fate finally brought their paths back together, Ethan would remember this night. He would remember the look in her eyes, the tremble in her voice, the sound of the rain against the glass, and for the first time in his life, he would realize what control had cost him. But for now, all he had was the silence of his office and the echo of a decision that would haunt him more than he could ever imagine. The night Catherine left Ethan's penthouse, she didn't know where she was going. The city felt colder than it ever had before. The bright lights suddenly harsh against her tear-streaked face. She clutched her suitcase in one hand and her purse in the other, her steps echoing against the wet pavement. The rain blurred the streets, but she kept walking, whispering to herself with every step, "I'll find a way. I have to." Her first days alone were the hardest. She found a small, run-down apartment on the edge of the city, its walls thin and its windows drafty. The rent took most of the money she had saved, leaving her with almost nothing. The cupboards were bare, and the bed creaked when she lay down at night. But when she pressed her hands against her stomach and thought about the tiny lives growing inside her, she felt a spark of strength that steadied her heart. Each morning, she rose before dawn, the city still asleep around her. She took odd jobs, answering phones at a diner, folding clothes at a laundromat, cleaning offices long after their workers had gone home. The work was exhausting, but she never let herself quit. She kept telling herself that every coin she earned was another stone in the foundation she was building for her children. The months passed, and Catherine's belly grew rounder. Strangers sometimes stared, curious about the young woman who carried so much weight in her eyes yet walked with her head high. At night, when loneliness pressed in, she would sit by the window of her apartment and talk to her unborn children. "You're not alone," she would whisper. "You're loved, you're wanted, and no matter what the world throws at us, I'll always be here." There were nights she cried herself to sleep, wondering how she would afford the next month's rent or how she would buy enough food. But even in those darkest moments, she never considered giving up. She remembered the silence in Ethan's office, the coldness in his eyes, and she swore her children would never feel that kind of emptiness. They would know love, even if it came only from her. The day came when the hospital filled with the sound of newborn cries to voices, not one. Catherine's heart nearly burst when she first held her twins. Their tiny fingers curled around hers, and tears rolled freely down her cheeks. "You're my miracle," she whispered to each of them. "You're the reason I'll never stop fighting." Life after that became even harder, but also more meaningful. Nights were restless, filled with feedings and the cries of hungry infants. Days blurred into one another as she juggled bottles, diapers, and long shifts at work. Sleep became a luxury she could barely afford. But whenever she looked into the wide eyes of her children, she felt stronger than she had ever been. Her neighbors sometimes wondered how she managed. They saw her rushing down the stairs with both babies in her arms, balancing bags of groceries, and still greeting them with a tired but warm smile. She rarely spoke of her past. She carried her pain quietly, like a shadow that followed her, but never let it darken the joy she found in her children. As the twins grew, Catherine taught them the values she held closest to her heart. She showed them how to find beauty in small things: the glow of the morning sun through the window, the laughter of children playing in the street, the warmth of a meal shared together. She didn't have much to give them in material things, but she gave them something greater: resilience, kindness, and the belief that even in hardship, there's hope. Yet there were times when the children were asleep and the apartment was quiet that Catherine would allow herself to remember. She would picture Ethan standing in his glass tower, powerful and untouchable, and wonder if he ever thought of them. Did he feel the weight of the choice he had made? Did he ever imagine what his children might look like, what their voices might sound like? She would shake the thoughts away, reminding herself that his absence was his choice and his loss. Still, the wound was there, deep and unspoken. A part of her heart carried the memory of his rejection, but she refused to let it define her. She had built a new life, not out of comfort or privilege, but out of sheer determination and love. Years passed, and the twins grew into lively, curious children. They filled the apartment with laughter, questions, and dreams. Catherine worked harder than ever, taking on multiple jobs to give them the best she could. She taught them to be strong, to face the world with courage, and to never let anyone tell them they weren't worthy. The city continued to shine its bright lights, and somewhere in those towers of glass and steel, Ethan Raines thrived. His company expanded, his wealth multiplied, and his name became even more powerful. But what he didn't know was that in a small corner of the same city, the very children he had once turned away were growing up, shaped not by his power, but by their mother's love and strength. The paths of their lives had split that night in his office. One path paved with gold, the other with struggle. But fate has a way of weaving threads back together, no matter how far apart they seem. And one day, when Ethan least expected it, those threads would pull tight, and everything he thought he had controlled would come undone. For now, Catherine kept moving forward. Her children's laughter became her music, their hugs her refuge, their dreams her mission. She carried her scars quietly, but they only made her stronger. What began as heartbreak had transformed into a journey of resilience, and in that journey, she discovered something Ethan never had: the unshakable strength of unconditional love. Ethan Raines was a man who had learned to silence his conscience. At least, that was what he told himself. Whenever doubt whispered in the quiet of his penthouse, he buried it beneath contracts, deals, and numbers. Whenever a flicker of memory surfaced, a trembling voice, the look in Catherine's eyes, he drowned it in ambition. He convinced himself that he had chosen wisely, that his decision had protected his empire from distraction. But no amount of success could silence the hollowness he carried within. The world around him believed he had it all. His company had expanded beyond borders, stretching across continents. His name was engraved in the financial districts of cities he barely had time to visit. Reporters called him a visionary, employees called him a genius, and competitors called him ruthless. Every title, every accolade only added to the fortress of power he had built around himself. But when the applause faded and the cameras turned off, silence followed him home like a shadow. The penthouse was immaculate, but sterile. Glass walls framed the skyline, polished floors reflected the city lights, and every corner spoke of wealth. Yet there was no warmth, no laughter, no photographs of family, no hand waiting for his at the end of the day. He told himself it didn't matter, that comfort was found in control. But some nights, as he looked out over the endless city lights, a question stirred quietly in his mind. What was all this for? He tried to answer it with more success. He bought yachts, collected cars, acquired properties that stood empty but were praised as investments. He filled his calendar with meetings and filled his nights with events where he smiled for cameras and made deals over champagne. And yet, when the lights dimmed and the crowds dispersed, he was left with the same silence, heavier each time. Ethan never spoke of Catherine. To his colleagues and acquaintances, she had simply disappeared, a chapter closed without explanation. But sometimes when fatigue loosened his guard, her face would rise in his memory, the way she had looked at him that night, not with anger alone, but with heartbreak. And though he pushed the thought away, a trace of unease always lingered. On the outside, his empire soared, but inside, he was a man chasing shadows, running from the one thing he could not control, the choices he had made. Years slipped by, and Ethan became a legend in the business world. Young executives studied his strategies, aspiring entrepreneurs quoted his words, and the press immortalized him as the man who never faltered. But no one saw the cost. No one knew that behind the flawless suits and polished smile, there was a man who sometimes woke in the night with a heaviness in his chest he couldn't name. Across the city, life unfolded in a very different rhythm. Catherine's apartment was far from luxurious, yet it was alive. The walls, though old, echoed with laughter and questions and the small chaos of childhood. The twins filled every corner with drawings, toys, and the kind of joy that didn't require wealth to exist. Catherine's eyes carried lines of exhaustion, but when she looked at her children, there was light in them, a light Ethan had never allowed himself to see. While Ethan measured success in numbers, Catherine measured it in moments. The first steps of her children, the sound of their laughter, the warmth of their arms around her neck. For every struggle she endured, she found reward in their growth. She taught them to dream, to believe, and to understand that their worth came not from what they owned, but from who they were. Fate, however, has a way of weaving invisible threads, pulling lives closer even when they seem worlds apart. Ethan's empire brought him recognition, but also exhaustion. One evening, after a long day of meetings, he returned to his penthouse and poured himself a drink. The glass trembled slightly in his hand, though he pretended not to notice. He stood at the window, staring at the city that glowed beneath him, and for the first time in years, he admitted to himself that he felt empty. He thought about what legacy meant. Would people remember his wealth, his deals? Or would they only remember him as another man who chased power? Until there was nothing left to chase, the thought unsettled him, though he quickly brushed it aside. He told himself he was too busy to dwell on such things, but deep down, the questions lingered. As the seasons changed, so too did the silence inside him. It grew heavier, more difficult to ignore. He began to notice small things, the way families laughed together at the restaurants where he dined alone, the way children clung to their parents in the airports he rushed through, the way old friends spoke about their children's milestones. While he nodded politely, unable to relate, he never said it out loud. But the truth pressed against him quietly. For all his power, he had no one. For all his wealth, he had nothing that made him whole. Catherine never knew of his struggles. She was too busy shaping her own life, one filled with purpose and love. Her twins were growing fast, their personalities blooming, their dreams already stretching beyond the small apartment they called home. Every night, as she tucked them in, she whispered reminders of their worth, of their strength, of the future that awaited them. And though money was scarce and the world was often unkind, she knew that what she gave them was more valuable than anything Ethan's empire could ever buy. The distance between their lives seemed unbridgeable, yet fate was patient, waiting for the right moment, and when it came, it would shake Ethan's carefully built world in ways he could never have prepared for. For now, he stood alone in his tower, glass of whiskey in hand, staring out at the city, as though it could answer the questions he refused to ask. He had convinced the world he was unbreakable, but deep inside, cracks were forming, and soon they would spread wide, enough for the truth to break through. The twins were no longer babies. In Catherine's arms, time, though often unkind, had given them strength, curiosity, and the boundless energy of childhood. Their small apartment, once filled with bottles and cribs, was now alive with drawings taped to the walls, books scattered across the floor, and laughter that spilled through the windows into the quiet street below. Catherine often marveled at them. They were different, yet alike in ways only twins could be. One carried a quiet thoughtfulness, always asking questions that made her pause before answering, while the other was bold, eager to race into the world without fear. Together, they created a balance that kept Catherine grounded even on the hardest days. Life, however, was far from easy. Money remained scarce. Catherine worked tirelessly, sometimes 2, sometimes 3 jobs, balancing her time between late nights and early mornings. There were weeks when she skipped meals just to make sure the children had enough. There were days when exhaustion pressed so heavily on her that she wondered how she could possibly keep going. But then she would hear her children's laughter or feel their arms wrap around her waist, and the strength would return. She became not only their mother but their teacher, their protector, their anchor. She taught them kindness in a world that often seemed indifferent. She taught them resilience, showing them that setbacks were not endings, only detours. She taught them to see beauty in simple things, the sunrise breaking through the cracks of their window blinds, The joy of sharing bread at the table, the magic of telling stories before bed. Yet Catherine also knew the world could be harsh, especially to those without wealth or influence. There were moments when the twins came home with questions that cut deep. Why don't we have a car like other families? Why can't you be home more, Mom? Why do the kids at school laugh at our clothes? Each question pierced her heart, but she always answered with honesty and hope. We may not have what others do, she would say gently, but we have each other, and that is more valuable than anything money can buy. Her words were not empty. The twins grew up believing them, carrying a quiet pride in who they were. They learned early that love, not wealth, was the true measure of a family still. Catherine sometimes lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was enough. She knew she could not give them everything. She could not replace the opportunities their absent father might have provided. Yet she also knew she had given them something Ethan never could, a home filled with unconditional love. As the years passed, the children's personalities flourished. They excelled in school, not because it was easy, but because they carried within them the determination their mother had instilled. Teachers often remarked on their resilience, their ability to lead, their willingness to help others. Catherine would smile humbly, knowing those qualities had been forged through struggle. The twins began to dream bigger than their small apartment allowed. One spoke of becoming a doctor, eager to heal people. The other dreamed of designing buildings that would touch the sky. Catherine listened to their dreams with tears in her eyes, promising that nothing was impossible if they believed in themselves. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan continued to expand his empire. His life was measured in profit margins and market shares, his calendar filled with conferences and interviews. To the world, he was more untouchable than ever, but behind the image, he carried a silence he could not shake. At social gatherings, when friends spoke of their children's accomplishments, Ethan nodded politely, pretending indifference, while something in his chest tightened. Sometimes, when he saw children laughing in parks or running through shopping malls, he found himself pausing, a strange ache settling inside him. He would quickly dismiss it, convincing himself that such things had no place in his life. Yet deep down, a quiet question remained. What would his life have been if he had chosen differently? Catherine never spoke Ethan's name to the twins. She believed they deserved to grow without bitterness. When they asked about their father, she simply said, "He wasn't ready for the gift that you are." Her words were soft, but her eyes carried both pain and strength. The twins, though young, understood that their mother had carried the weight of their lives alone, and for that, they loved her all the more. Despite the challenges, Catherine created a world of hope for them. She encouraged them to chase their dreams, to never measure their worth by what others thought, and to believe that their future could be brighter than their circumstances. They grew not only with resilience, but with compassion, traits that would one day surprise even the man who had once turned away from them. Fate, patient as ever, continued to weave its threads, while Catherine built her world out of sacrifice and love, and Ethan built his out of ambition and control. Their paths were slowly drawing closer. One day, in a place neither of them expected, the distance between their lives would collapse, and in that moment, Ethan would be forced to confront the choice he had buried for years. For now, the twins filled their mother's life with joy, their laughter echoing against the walls of their small apartment, their dreams reaching higher than the city skyline. Catherine, though weary, found her strength renewed each time she looked at them. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew this truth. She had already given them more than she ever thought possible: the courage to rise above, and the belief that even in the face of hardship, love could light the way. The day began like any other for Ethan Rains. His calendar was packed, his assistants trailed behind him with tablets glowing, and the world seemed to revolve around his next decision. The mall was not a place he often visited. His life was far too curated for casual errands, but that afternoon a private meeting had been arranged in a luxury cafe, tucked into one of the city's largest shopping centers. His arrival drew stares, as it always did, though he barely noticed. He had trained himself to ignore the eyes of strangers, to move through the world as if insulated by glass. But glass, no matter how strong, can shatter. As he left the cafe, his security detail a few steps behind. He felt it. Not a sound, not a voice, something deeper. His gaze, drawn as if by instinct, landed across the atrium. And in that instant, the ground beneath him seemed to vanish. Two children. They stood at the edge of a fountain, laughing as coins glittered under the water. A boy and a girl. Their features so strikingly familiar that Ethan's breath caught. In his chest, the curve of their faces, the glimmer in their eyes, it was like staring into a mirror of what might have been. He froze, his polished image crumbling as a wave of recognition slammed into him. His legs refused to move. His lungs struggled to draw air. He had faced hostile investors, lawsuits, and markets that threatened to collapse, but nothing had ever undone him like this. The girl tilted her head, her laughter ringing out, and for the briefest moment Ethan saw Catherine in her smile. The boy leaned over the fountain, mischievous and curious, and Ethan felt his own childhood flash before him. He couldn't deny it. He didn't need proof. In the marrow of his bones, he knew these were his children. The world around him blurred. The noise of shoppers, the calls of vendors, the footsteps echoing against the marble floor, all of it faded until there was only them. His hands trembled, his chest tightened. He wanted to step forward, to say something, to close the distance, but his body betrayed him. He stood rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a storm of emotions he had never allowed himself to feel. Catherine appeared a moment later, carrying a bag of groceries in one hand. She moved with the same quiet strength she had always carried, though. Lines of exhaustion traced her face, yet when she smiled at the children, Ethan saw a glow no hardship could extinguish. The twins ran to her, wrapping their arms around her waist, and she bent down to kiss the tops of their heads. The sight struck him harder than any blow could. He had told himself for years that he had made the rational choice, that his empire mattered more than anything else, but as he stood there, watching the family, he had turned away. He realized the truth he had buried under layers of ambition. He had lost more than he had ever gained. 1,000 thoughts crashed through his mind. Did they know who he was? Did Catherine ever speak of him? Would they ever accept him if he tried to step into their lives now? His heart pounded with questions, but fear kept him silent. For the first time in his life, Ethan Raines, the man who commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will, felt powerless. Catherine glanced up then, her eyes scanning the crowd. For a fleeting second, their gazes met. Time seemed to freeze. Ethan saw in her eyes a flicker of surprise, followed by something sharp, recognition. Yes, but also the reminder of wounds that had never healed. She did not falter. She simply straightened, took her children's hands, and turned toward the exit. Ethan wanted to call out. He wanted to bridge the years with a single word, but the sound died in his throat. He could only watch as they walked away, their small figures disappearing into the tide of people. And when they were gone, the emptiness that filled him was greater than anything he had ever known. His security detail touched his shoulder, asking if he was all right. He nodded stiffly, forcing composure back onto his face, but inside he was unraveling. The meeting, the deals, the empire, all of it felt meaningless in that moment. He had stood in front of everything he had secretly longed for, and fear had kept him frozen. That night, his penthouse felt colder than ever. He sat in silence, staring at the city that had once seemed to define him. The reflection in the window was not the man the world admired, but a man haunted by what he had lost. He poured a drink but set it down untouched. For the first time, he admitted to himself that control had cost him the only thing that could have made his life. Hold out across the city, Catherine tucked her children into bed. They chattered about the fountain, the coins, the fun of their day. She kissed them good night and turned off the light, her heart steady. She had seen him, yes, and though the past had left scars, she knew her choice had been the right one. Her children were her world, and nothing could take that away. But fate had already begun its work. Ethan had seen them now, the image of their faces, their laughter, their bond with Catherine. It was seared into his mind, unshakable, and no matter how much he tried to bury it, he knew he could not stay frozen forever. One day soon, he would have to face them, and when that moment came, everything he thought he knew about strength, success, and control would be tested in ways he could never have imagined. Ethan Raines could not sleep. Night after night, the same image haunted him: the fountain, the laughter, the small hands reaching for Catherine, the way her smile carried a light he had never known. He had faced failures in markets, betrayals, in business, storms that could have sunk his empire, yet none of them left him trembling like this memory did. For the first time in years, his life of order and control felt meaningless. The fortune, the accolades, the endless victories, all of it seemed hollow compared to the sight of two children he had never held. He tried to bury himself in work, as he always had. Meetings filled his days, conferences filled his calendar. But the more he ran, the louder the silence grew. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw them. Whenever he passed a family on the street, he thought of what he had denied himself. He had told himself for so long that he was protecting his future. Now he realized he had only been running from it. One evening, after another long day, Ethan found himself standing outside the small apartment building Catherine now called home. He had tracked her down not through power or connections, but through determination, driven not by ambition, but by a need he could no longer ignore. His hand hovered near the buzzer, his chest tight with fear. The man who once commanded rooms with a glance now stood trembling, unsure of what he would say, unsure if he even had the right to speak at all. When Catherine finally opened the door, time seemed to fold in on itself. She looked at him with steady eyes, the same eyes that once searched his face for warmth and found only coldness. Her children's voices echoed faintly from inside, their laughter filling the space between them. Ethan swallowed hard, his rehearsed words scattering like leaves in the wind. "I don't expect forgiveness," he began, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. I had to see you, to see them, to tell you I was wrong." Catherine's face did not soften easily. Years of struggle, of raising children alone, of carrying both love and pain, had carved strength into her features. Yet she listened. She did not slam the door, though part of her wanted to. Instead, she let him speak, because she knew that hearing his words mattered not for her sake, but for the truth her children deserved. "I thought power was everything," Ethan continued, his voice shaking with the weight of admission. "I thought control would protect me, but it cost me the only thing that mattered. I can't change the past, Catherine, but I need to be a part of their future. If you let me." Silence stretched between them, filled with years of unspoken pain. Catherine's mind raced through memories: the night she left, the tears she shed, the countless struggles she endured. Yet as she looked into his eyes, she saw something different than before. The arrogance was gone. The steel had melted into something raw, something human. "They are not a second chance for you," she said firmly, her voice steady. "They are not here to fix your regrets. They are my children, and they have grown strong without you. If you want to know them, it won't be because of your wealth or your name. It will be because you show up every day with humility and love, nothing less." Her words struck him harder than any boardroom defeat ever had. But he nodded, because he knew she was right. For the first time in his life, he wasn't bargaining, wasn't negotiating. He was simply asking, hoping, willing to give whatever it took. In the days that followed, Ethan began to return, slowly at first, with small gestures, helping carry groceries, offering rides, sitting quietly in the corner while the twins did their homework. The children eyed him with curiosity, their questions hesitant at first. Catherine watched carefully, guarding their hearts. But she also saw something she had never expected: effort. Real effort. Ethan learned things that no amount of money could have bought him. He learned how his son laughed when he solved a puzzle. He learned how his daughter's eyes lit up when she spoke of her dreams. He learned that family was not about control, but about presence, not about wealth, but about love. The road was not easy. The twins, smart beyond their years, asked questions that cut deep. "Why weren't you there before? Didn't you want us?" Ethan answered with honesty, his voice breaking as he admitted the truth of his fear, his pride, his mistakes. And though the answers hurt, the honesty began to build something fragile yet real: trust. Catherine remained cautious, but as weeks turned to months, she saw change. Not the man she had once left, but someone who had been broken by his own choices. and rebuilt by the desire to make things right. She had promised herself she would never let bitterness poison her children's hearts. And so she let him try. Not for her, but for them. One evening, as the sun set behind the city, Ethan sat on the floor of Catherine's apartment, playing a board game with his children. Their laughter filled the room, and Catherine watched from the doorway. For a moment, she saw not the man who once turned away, but a father learning what it meant to love. It would never erase the past. The scars would always remain. But scars are not only marks of pain, they are also proof of survival. Catherine knew that her children would grow not with bitterness, but with strength, and Ethan, though late, would carry the lesson for the rest of his life, that no empire, no fortune, no success could ever compare to the simple, profound gift of family. And so the story that began with control, rejection, and loss transformed into one of resilience, forgiveness, and hope. A reminder that even the strongest armor can crack, but from those cracks, light can enter. A reminder that it is never too late to choose love over pride, presence over ambition, and humanity over control.